Okay, so we're rolling. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another webinar in this series of webinars brought to you by Perfect Scale, where we bring you the best of DevOps software and now also GenAI knowledge in the industry. And today I'm very happy to have with me Patrick Dubois, the man who coined the term DevOps, the original organizer of the DevOps Days conferences, and of course the man who now knows more than probably anyone about that special place, that special intersection of GenAI and DevOps. Patrick, I'm very happy to have you with us.
It's a pleasure to be here, and so always happy to share whatever I learned.
Okay, and Patrick, as far as I know, you've recently been working at Showpad, leading the engineering effort there, and then now you're an independent consultant.
Yeah, this space is so fascinating, and I enjoy learning by doing things myself. So that's why I kind of like am full in and on this journey to learn.
Yes, you had a fascinating presentation on the last, what was it, DevOps Days here in Tel Aviv. Also around GenAI and DevOps, and of course today I'm very excited to have you with us, and we're looking forward to what you have to tell.
Okay, let's kick it off. I'll share my screen.
Okay, go ahead.
Let's find the right one.
And while at it, folks, you can send us questions. We have Q&A if you're on Zoom, and if you're LinkedIn, just post it on the LinkedIn live feed, and we'll get them brought here, and I'll make sure to ask Patrick whatever you want to know.
Yeah. My talk is in 3 parts. The first part is going to be about delivering GenAI applications, and I think how that fits into a platform team. The second one is about the impact of GenAI on engineers and working kind of with their new tooling that is GenAI powered. And a bonus now is kind of like agents, and look at it like how it's going to change the organizational structure, also known as Conway's law impact on there. So let's get started. First part, GenAI delivery with a platform team. Whenever there's a new technology or a new thing that comes in the industry, there's always a similar pattern. Like you have one team playing with it, learning with it, then we'll try to repeat what that one team has done. And then ultimately, if it's technology that's used everywhere, then we try to scale that technology out by partly abstracting things and then making part of this self-servicing to other teams. So this has happened with cloud, with agile, with ITIL. They all kind of have this incubating pattern of moving things along. So it should be no kind of surprise that that abstraction layer is, in a way, you could see it as a platform team. This is part of the team topologies, and it is one way of teams collaborating in a bigger organization. So my point is, like, as you spread more of these GenAI applications to your feature teams, moving parts into your platform team makes sense. That is a pattern that we've known to scale there. Another similarity with DevOps and kind of the new GenAI movement is every kind of movement has a new identity. It was the agile engineer, the agile coach, or kind of the first incubator person. They all got a label. Today, it seems at least the industry is heading towards the word AI engineer. It is not like the machine learning engineers, it's somewhere in between. And like every of the namings, they're bad and they're good, right? It is a label, and it allows us to discuss the things and find the stories that are out there. Another thing that we learned with DevOps is that we are bringing silos together. And in this case, we are actually bringing the data science folks that used to live in their data lake on their own, kind of like separate, often from production, and the engineers. And now we have like a special breed that brings this in. And I've noticed this, at the organization as well. The data science and the engineering are separate. All of a sudden, data science is involved in the first kind of pilot because they're the ones who know LLM, Genai. All of a sudden have to do engineering practices. So we add more engineers to that. And ultimately, we kind of scale part of that knowledge into the platform team. So it's another kind of shifting ride because we bring them not just on research and so on, we bring them actually closer towards production and the use. So what I'm proposing is how to tackle this. When you scale something in the organization, you build a platform that is the abstraction layer, the services you provide. You do enablement on those services, you educate the teams, and then you bring governance on top of that, of everything you do. And I'm going to show some examples of each of those, what that means in the GenAI space. So an autonomy of a GenAI applications, you have some code, you have some prompts, APIs, a middleware that glues everything together, some models, some data. There is an input on the left, there is a reply that goes the output on the right. So kind of this is the type of application we're delivering to production. There's just some new elements, a prompt is new, an LLM is new, the rest we kind of know, and the orchestration framework as well. So what goes into a platform? What kind of services go in there? Many models, pick one. There's been an explosion, whether that's one of the earlier ones or, commercial ones. That's something that goes into your platform. You have to provide those models from your SaaS provider or maybe run your own. So that goes into your kind of infrastructure of your platform. Then when people are playing with the models or maybe training and version controlling their prompts as well, you kind of need version control. Another thing, like our code repositories, we have model repositories, and we can bring also prompt repositories in. A new service that is used to index all our information or unstructured information is a vector database. It's a new component. We didn't have that before. It was not like a no code, like a NoSQL or a SQL. This is more like a search index tool. So that's something you'd be able to provide to all of your feature teams as a service as well. Now, all that needs data. And to connect data, you need connectors. And sometimes that is referred to as retrieval augmented generation, mixing a prompt with your own data. And so kind of bringing all those connectors in and connecting all your data towards the developers and the applications is another kind of component that you want to bring. These are connectors, but the fact that you're providing them with a catalog of all your data, all the sources that people can use in their applications is something you can do, centrally, and you can provide that to all the teams so they don't have to re-implement their own connections to all the sources. Now we can go further up the stack and, kind of agents as a service. So not everybody has to build the infrastructure to run agents. That's maybe more out there right now. But there's also other things like we had being independent of clouds. Well, you want to be independent of models or SaaS providers of models. So we can put in proxies in place so the developers don't need to know how to call, and there's a unified API, and they can just switch models and kind of go from there. Then we have load balancers, we have failback, all the things we kind of are also doing in API gateways, but it's now with kind of models to do that. And then as all these things cost money, it makes sense to do some caching, right? Like if you do a request, you already have the reply, why do it again? So there's a semantic layer of caching that you can bring into this fabric. If one team is doing the same queries as the other, you kind of get the benefits from there. So it's all like infra that you're providing from that platform. No surprise, you need monitoring and observability. This is a project called OpenLLametry from Traceloop. They feed all the metrics of usage of models of requests to your monitoring system. So you can bring that in. It has some new kind of metrics that you're not used to with just API calls. And then like we had API tracing, now you want to do traces of calls, of prompts, asking another prompt, asking another prompt. So that traceability, that debugging tool, or a kind of tracing is another thing you can build and bring into your platform for not all the developers having to build their own tracing, but it's like a component you provide to them. And then finally, we take all the tracing, we take all the data, and we can build monitors. So there's a set of test data of inputs and outputs that goes through your application. So if we have that test frame, we could as well put that into a monitor to see if everything keeps working. So like an API health check, but now for input and output calls of your application. If a model changed, we might detect that something is wrong thanks to this monitoring. So it's kind of an interesting way. And we can also do things like monitor whether it was a toxic response because we're dealing with text. So we want to monitor that it's not going off the rails and kind of, is it still positive? So there's a new things that we're monitoring text quality there as well. And then tracking all the feedback from the users and learning from this to get a better prompt, get a meta model, fine-tune the model, change the logic. That is also a central service every team will need, because it's not just putting it out there, it's then seeing it with real end user usage and kind of tracking whether that's a simple signal as thumbs up, thumbs down, or somebody editing the response. It's all feedback for developer teams to get better at the Genai application. And this creates like a confidence there. You know, you recognize this. It's like the Kubernetes ecosystem. This is the new ecosystem that is just expanding and going wild, right? So this is not going to stop. And there's something for everything. And you know, eventually that is part of the infra that results in kind of the offering of a platform team. Now, I talked to you about enablement, but what can you do? Like, you have all that infrastructure, your teams are scaling, they're new to this, so you want to bring them up to speed and do enablement. One of the easiest thing is to have them play with AI and learn on AI, because you don't want them to be afraid. You do a hackathon, you organize maybe some partners that come in, showcase some of the AI. So you kind of do this enablement for teams to learn and kind of work with. You remove constraints for them being able to call an API or an AI system that was blacklisted before. In that way, you kind of provide enablement for the first usage. And then you create like playgrounds for them to prototype, to see. And that's not just for your engineer, that could also be your product owner, because all of a sudden you've connected your data now with this, something that is not available in the public ones, and you can kind of do more prototyping. And that gets people excited on the usage as well. You can have developers run this locally now on their laptop. They're kind of working and improving their like a local development cycle with a local LLM and run it from there to not always have to be dependent on there. And you help them choose a framework. Maybe you settle on a standard framework in your company. There's a variety on frameworks. One is better for, let's say, you know, Python, the other one is optimized for the Microsoft ecosystem. So you kind of help them select the right framework instead of them, every team going off and using a different framework out there. And then I think one of the important things is you advocate that you need testing, no surprise, and you explain them to do testing. It's one of the biggest hurdles for kind of new people writing applications. They can make it work, but can you make it work consistently? And the difference is in testing is we've been used to exact testing, pattern test matching for finding a word or something in a response. But now there's things like, is this output toxic? We use an helper model to do this. Or we could even ask an other LLM, what do you think about the answer of the other LLM? That's called like LLM as a judge. And that's the way of scaling feedback and your testing mechanism, because, you know, it's more than it looks good, right? So that's kind of a bigger hurdle that, you know, after the first year of building the applications, everybody's kind of like, okay, now we got this. It's very cost intensive to do this manual testing, and we don't want to do this. We want to be more certain about that. You provide golden pots. Maybe there's some reusable prompts that you want to do, like personas from your company, or kind of like the way you express these things. So it's like a library of reusable components you start to gather across the teams, much like you would do libraries or other stuff there as well. So this is in a nutshell enablement. And then to finalize, there's governance that you can put in place. That is, you know, laying all the enablement we did, but kind of within constraints. And you kind of hear this, like, you know, we don't trust the AI. We, you know, people used to say we don't trust the cloud. So it's a matter of time, right? So what does it take for kind of companies to trust the AI cloud services? And it's actually not that different. So if it works well, that builds the trust. One of the first things you'll be looking into is like, what license are we using? Similar to your code libraries, now you have to think about the models. What is the licensing? Is it open source? Is it proprietary? Can I run it on my production system? Can I not? Like, there's a lot of things for you to check in there. So that's one way of doing the governance, is that you kind of vet which models are allowed to be used for production and make that a standard. Then you look at what goes into the models, because even some models, they might be biased and they might have problems, or they're like, so you want to dig into almost like an SBOM. What went into the model? Like, what is it about? Like, how was it trained? Who did what? What's the environment? So that's sometimes referred to as model cards, as a way of expressing that. Then there's legislation. Are you allowed to do this? Kind of the new, like, high risk, low risk, what is allowed, how you deal with like the exceptions, those information. So you have to be aware and kind of educate teams on what is the art of the not possible, but allowable in this case. And then the same thing with the monitoring the metrics that we showed before on the data. You can now also do on PII, and maybe like some prompt injection monitoring. So you kind of keep this that governance automated, that you detect the breaches and things that are leaking information from the company as well. So kind of those things you can put in place. And it's also part of your infrastructure, of course, of your platform to provide this. Then think similar to a WAF. This is kind of guardrails as a service. You kind of check what goes in and what goes out. So maybe you don't want it to talk about your competitors, so you filter that out. So it's kind of like making sure those things, and you know, the pattern is similar to LLM as a judge or a helper model, that kind of make sure that there's a guardrail of what is allowed to be shown to the user as well. So that exists also, but it's part of your governance. You don't want each team to figure out those guardrails by themselves. There should be a central kind of own set of guardrails. And then finally, maybe to protect what goes in, you know, prompt injection protection, whether you're doing, you know, the typical security vulnerability checks. These is a new element. There's also like an OWASP top 10 for LLMs, kind of work on this to educate the developers and make sure there's protection on that. So AI engineer is going to be overhyped, like DevOps is and was, but you know, the skills that you need to learn, the models, the APIs, the protections, that will stay valuable, you know, over the course. So once you're now rolling into this, those skills will be helpful for future steps into the Genai. And like my biggest takeaway, like I always wanted to get into the data science and the AI engineering, but I always felt I didn't have like enough mathematical background, and I did not have the data sciences. But this whole new game of AI engineering is integration, and something we've been very good at. So kind of that should take away your your worries that you're not like fit for this. Like you got this. You understand the caching. You understand cost. You understand kind of those patterns, and that's kind of the point that I try to make here. I talked a little bit of team topologies. I want to mention this as well. There's some other ways of bringing in AI enablement. And this is a model called Unfix. It's known in the Agile community, but I specifically want to point out, in the middle you see the platform crew, but there's also an experience crew. And an experience queue will make all the product feature teams look at displaying AI in a consistent way. So that is also a way of enabling in that it is not just consistent on the technical layer, but it's also consistent on the product layer, something you can bring in. And so eventually it boils down to, we run the platform, all the infrastructure, we help all the feature teams kind of use it, we put the guardrails and the governance in place. And so if you have CloudOps, SecOps, developer experience, data platform, you now have the AI platform team in there. And then maybe you have an AI experiences team that brings this across all the feature teams as well. There's no need for premature optimization. If you're a three-man person, don't build a platform team. So if you only have one team, it doesn't scale. But companies who are kind of scaling this out in their company are using a similar pattern to this one to kind of bring this to the all the teams there. And if you want to have a look, this is kind of like a training course that I made for people new to this, and I explain LLMs from kind of a DevSec and Ops perspective and what goes in, and it's more like a hands-on coding as well. So if you want to dip your toes and kind of like play around with, sorry for the clickbaity image, but that was the best I got. So yeah, that's kind of the whole takeaway of making sure that we kind of are able to scale this in the organization. So I'll pause here and see if there's any questions about this.
Thanks, Patrick. Great content, loads of knowledge, and definitely, well, if there's one thing I hear is that, there's a lot of new pieces of the puzzle that we now need to integrate. So definitely DevOps work is never done. and even less so now with the evolution of AI. Now let's see about the questions. So one question we received from LinkedIn Live is somebody asking if you can share the European legislation.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we can either share the presentation and that has the links in it. But yeah, I don't know it by heart, but it is public, right? It's not. It should not be hard to find in that way. But it was.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. And somebody's okay. Somebody's asking, this is great content. I appreciate this. I agree. However, ahead of any prototyping infrastructure enablement, one needs to have a real conversation whether you have a real business value versus something whimsical. Do you have a framework that you utilize to say have a conversation around AI for DevOps? For example, Q or Code Whisper for dev enablement, etc., but really looking at the business value, say through developer productivity, etc. Curious if you have a framework you use for these engagements.
Yeah. So we're going to get into more of the productivity tools for engineering in the next part. But it's totally right that, without a use case that does not make sense, like it is playing around just for the sake of technology, that doesn't result a good thing. So that's why it's so important, like the playground, when you have what I've seen a few times now in hackathons is that even the product owners, when using simple things like the ChatGPT integrated with their own data, they can kind of come up way better with their use cases and also get them excited on that. And they probably know it better, what makes sense. But of course, yeah, just slap AI on this and it's not going to work and give you benefits. And there is certainly a cost to this as well. So although I would not optimize for costs immediately if you have a good use case, because cost will go down essentially. But yeah, it's and I think the most valuable ways of looking where it is probably look into your workflow that you do day to day, and that's just something that makes it pay off. If something you do every day and you can improve whatever aspect of this, there's likely to be an aspect that it's valuable for the business to improve. Whether they're willing to pay for this, that's another story. But kind of that is how you frame it often, and how much the benefit is there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think some companies are just in the Gen AI business right now, and many more are, researching it because they realize there may be business use cases. But yeah, I agree. This is a lot of this is cutting edge, and we don't know. And basically, that's where DevOps practices come very handy, because they allow us to get creative fast and to get feedback fast. So yeah, definitely, I think that's where Gen AI can benefit from DevOps practices and not the other way around.
Yeah. Well, that too, but we'll get to that indeed.
Yeah, and there are more questions, and I see they all touch upon how Gen AI will impact the teams developing infrastructure as code,
Okay.
and how there is also a question if you're advocating the AI experience people to be part of the platform engineering team. So I guess you're going to touch upon this in the next part, right?
Yeah, indeed. All right,
Okay.
let's get to
Okay,
that.
let's go. Let's go to that.
All right. Now I have to find the right presentation somehow.
If only there was an AI that could help you with this.
Indeed. And I could just say, what screen was I last presenting on? Right, so let's do the share. Go up. And so we are now at the part where the impact of GenAI on engineering. And it's typically, it's not the opposite, but it's a different section. Like, we've been used to automating so much stuff, and we've built our tools to do this. And now more and more of the tools we use, they will say, we are now AI enabled to do this, whether that's our code editor or whether that's something else, right? So, but it's something you cannot do a lot about, because it's typically your vendor who will bring this in, but it helps to think about this. And I think every time you talk about engineering and Gen AI or kind of AI, they will bring in kind of Copilot. And now my keynote has crashed, so you see it's not the AI. So hang on. Window. So it was actually not the crash, but it was asking for permissions. So, maybe it's the smart AI. Right. So Copilot is what everybody knows in that way, whether that's for your regular code, your infrastructure as code. It's the one thing people look at to do this coding. And that's how you typically get exposed to this. I'm going to take a giant leap from this, because there's many tooling that I could show, but I'm kind of focusing on this. This approach is still I do something, I ask for something, it gives me a result. I copy and paste this in, I accept the change. We are now heading towards a new kind of level, which is autopilot and Devin, that just says, like, I want a certain task, go away and come back when you finish the task. So one of those things here, that was a company, Cognition, they showed this, they just gave whatever LLM the tools of browsing the web, having a terminal to execute commands, and kind of looking at the feedback. So this is the same thing you would do manually. Maybe you're kind of like, oh, I generate this, I run it, and so on. They just kind of created this in a continuous loop. So just to show you, the next level. And a lot of people have kind of argued this will never work, although the company is being bought by Microsoft right now. So it's kind of like, anyway, it is something we're heading towards in a way that we can delegate part of our work. That's the way how I want to think it. Whether it has the perfect results, that is another discussion. So this was just Google stats of the way how it increased the code generation automatically by AI. From 25% to 50%. It was kind of their kind of analysis of their internal tooling. And I have like lots of tooling, and they're improving obviously on a lot of developers at Google. So just to give you an idea there. So the question is, do we still need to hire humans, right? This is a billboard, obviously tongue in cheek, but that's the question everybody's like getting for, like, what are we still there for, right? Like, can't I just ask the code generation from something else? So the saying goes, AI will not take your job, but people who know how to use AI will take your job if you're not using AI. So it becomes like an extra part on becoming more productive or using this. That's kind of one way of looking this. Like, it's not something you need to fight. It is like any automation tool before, something that hopefully makes you more productive and helps you to get better at your job. Now, all the stories of people using this after a while, they have this feeling that they become a reviewer of whatever is generated. So it's almost like you become the manager of your tools and say, that's good, that's bad, kind of make the judgment calls. But that is something that not just in this article, you see this in tweets. I've become, the reviewer, the manager, kind of dealing with this stuff. And it's almost like you become, developers might become an ops person again. Oh, accept this? No, not that. That's a good release. That's not a good release. Kind of, human oversight is what is still, what is your task there. And for human oversight, you need the tools to be understandable. And if you can't understand it immediately, what it's generating, you're like in the middle of like, what do I do? Do I just blindly accept or not? So you cannot just do this. Like, one of the things is like, somebody generating code in a language they don't know, they might just accept. And then after 5 times they say, oh, it didn't run. What do I do now? So you kind of have to have the understandable thing still, what it's presenting to you, that it's suggesting. So there's a little bit of work there to do without just kind of just generating things. But that's maybe more of the LLM to adapt to us. And what you still need when you have those kind of things coming back to you, you have to have the experience to this. So it's not something junior that they all of a sudden get better at judging, like, this is a good pull request, this is not a good pull request, right? That is still your expertise of judging the output that is doing there. Of course, maybe if some parts can get auto-executed and they have the right exec code and that is good, that could be automated. But other stuff still needs that experience to judge. And so the AI is not responsible for this. You are responsible, and that's part of your reviewer, that even if you're not doing all the work, you become the responsible, almost like, if you're on call, you're responsible for what goes down, but you haven't written the software, right? But you feel, and what do? You learn about the system, you look at the documentation, you kind of have this responsibility. So that responsibility is not going away, and you need the expertise and kind of deal with this. And obviously, I find this like old DevOps board for people who still know that, like, yes, there is a risk, right? Like, if you have automated DevOps pipelines, they can take down all your servers. And maybe, if here you make the wrong judgment, there is this. So kind of that is an impact that you have to be aware of. And that's something you're not blindly going to accept to do. But there is a certain design fatigue, much like, alert fatigue, or like, kind of vulnerability fatigue. If you're just pushing a button and says, yeah, it'll be okay. But, you have to look for the signals and be prepared for that fatigue. And that's part of your job, to keep yourself on your toes. There is a funny story about GitHub Copilot, that developers accept the output that was generated more on weekends because maybe they don't want to think on the weekend and they just accept this. But it's kind of like that fatigue that goes on. And yeah, you want to learn from all the failures, right? So even if the bots have done, yeah, if they fail, what have we learned? Kind of like, yes, they can learn, but you have to learn as well, being in that loop as well. And this brings me up to the ironies of automation, and it's something that we've been discussing early DevOps things, that things work against you when you make things automated. When they fail, you still have to understand what is going on. And when you automate the easy stuff, the hard stuff gets harder. So there's kind of a balance and an irony of just automating will not make all the problems go away. And there's a paper on this that translated the paper of ironies of automation to the ironies of Genai automation. And one of the first things you see, instead of producing stuff, you become an evaluator. You do not want to have the interruptions of all the on-calls. You want to have filtering on what is right, what is not right. You don't want to have like this unstructured things coming at you. You want to have like structured output. So there's a lot of learnings we can do from the ironies of automation that kind of got transported to the DevOps automation and now is going into the Genai automation. And like in my head, this was a summary when I look back on how the DevOps practices kind of started emerging and flourishing. We started maybe on the left with infrastructure as code. It was all like, oh, getting the automation working, that was all good. And if you look at on all the others, it's all about preventing for failure, detecting the failure, designing for failure, dealing with failure, and then even chaos engineering. Like, because we did not have practice enough, now we have to train for the failure. So maybe that is the irony of like the more we automate things, and yes, the AI can make it easier for us to help. We have to train and we have to build our tools to, when it fails, to still interact, because your responsibility is still there. You need to have the domain knowledge that is still there. So that's kind of like what works counter against saving a lot of time, because the problems get harder and you spend a lot of time on that. And maybe reflecting back, on the automation, there's also a discussion about trust. And this is a very old kind of like a table about automating levels. And one is like computer offers no assistance, and all the way up, like it does it autonomously. And I'm kind of exaggerating, but first we kind of had CF Engine that was based on agents being able to make decisions on things without asking the human and only dealing with the exceptions, maybe. Then we had Chef and Puppet kind of bringing things like, oh, we run this continuously, but we see the outputs and we leave that up to the kind of the automator. And then people started using more and more Ansible. And I'm not saying Ansible should be used like this, but more and more it was like, okay, I change the code, I do a run, and I check it. It's almost like they were micromanaging their YAML files on what got executed, right? So it's a level of trust you have, similar to people only doing check-in on branches and not doing the CI and the CD, kind of that trust level of automation. And I don't know whether this part will kind of puts itself as well with agents automations, that people are too scared about running the agents. So it's interesting to at least to see the analogies there. So I found this good kind of quote that it's not about artificial intelligence, it's more about like intelligent automation, and some things make sense to automate, some do not make sense to automate, and kind of then we know when we have to automate that we deal kind of with the exceptions and work from there. So yeah, I'll pause here, and I hope that gave people a little bit more a feeling that they kind of should not be afraid for their job, but their kind of job might change, and the way they run things might at least change in there.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. So yeah, we do have a couple of questions. I think they arrived earlier, but still. Okay, so first of all, a question from Helena from LinkedIn Live, who says, what were the biggest challenges that you had so far with DevSecOps with AI until now? What has been more challenging? Was it DevSec or Ops part of it?
Yeah. So most of the companies are focused right now on the dev. They're moving towards the ops, and then kind of like then it will come more of a sec. It depends a little bit on the domain, because if you're obviously in healthcare, you might worry a bit more on the sec, but it's kind of like the generalization of it. So the biggest challenges in the dev, like I mentioned, was actually the testing and dealing with these kind of non-deterministic outputs and making this testable. The prompts and rewriting the prompts is one of the challenges, because there's a lot of changes and the prompts are very linked to models. So it's almost like you need to do a continuous refactoring on that. The ops is interesting, but I would say the space has not settled. And sec is mostly about the provenance on the model and kind of the licensing on the model. They do know it's about prompt injection, but there hasn't been like a perfect solution for this. So everybody's kind of like, we think it's going to be okay for now. So kind of, but it all depends on the use case and how strict you're focusing on the use case. If you allow free form generation, obviously that opens up a lot more kind of undeterministic behavior. If you're just asking, generate me an email, you make it very explicit to a customer, then there's a lot less risk of you running these things in production.
Yeah, and then definitely if you're introducing a RAG, then that gives additional security loopholes. I suppose
RAG definitely.
maybe with the trust being currently so low, security probably is less of an issue right now because people are very scared as it is.
Yeah, I think with the chat pattern, people feel that they're still a lot in control, like the human loop, kind of output, and they select the input. If we move towards the agents and kind of the delegating of a whole task, then that's gonna worry a little bit more, like, okay, what's happening? And now that's still too much focused on, can we make this result better on the agents? And then start to worry about the next way. I'm not saying people are not focusing on this, but that's kind of what my feeling is of teams using this technology as such.
Okay. There's another question. I'll leave that to the end. Actually, I have a question of my own. So, with platform engineering, we focus a lot on the interfaces. So basically, it's a lot about, how do we reduce the cognitive load? We talk a lot about APIs, providing APIs that are simple and understandable, and also there are this whole movement of building internal developer portals where it's the journey from zero to a running service in production should be very easy and understandable. Now, on the other hand, the way you interface with the models today is suddenly, instead of having a clear interface, you have this very amorphous fuzzy thing called a prompt where you're not sure what the input should be and what the output is going to be when you input that thing. So
Mhm.
how does that somehow interplay with the
Yeah.
focus on interfaces and platform engineering?
So, well, if you just want text in and text out, that's just the contract is text in, text out. But if you want to be a bit more stricter on, let's say I want to have the weather, in Belgium today, in degrees Celsius, I could give uh, the LLM a hint on saying, well, I would like to have this as a JSON format, and this is how it should look like. So
Mhm.
that creates maybe a more stricter contract. And the typical way you do this is you specify similar to a schema of your API, and you feed that as kind of part of the prompt and say, this is how the schema looks like. Please answer using this schema. And then there's a little bit of sometimes of a retry if it doesn't give this in the right order or kind of perfect thing. You say like, oh, it doesn't comply to the schema, try again. So you will see this JSON mode, for example, on OpenAI um, as an option. And you also see the retries being happening internally. So it's part of your platform that it's gonna deal with this a little bit better. Obviously, there's a number of retries and the maximum, but that's kind of how I saw some people making this more structured.
Okay, it sounds like a lot of cognitive load in that.
Well, you when you develop an API, you also have to say like, what is my schema? What is this? Is this a string? Is this kind of that feel? So it's that easy that you say, I define this as code, and I say almost like save this as a JSON string, and that automatically gets injected to the prompt when querying. So those kind of frameworks, it's not that you have to do it yourself. There's like a kind of some wrappers around this as well.
Catch. Okay, then I think we're good to go to the third part.
All right, let's do it.
Agents, the most exciting part.
Well, this is a little bit more out there. Like everything's out there. Like nothing has settled in the industry. So I'm partly speculating and trying to get feedback and kind of like extrapolating things. But yeah, let's see. So the last part is agents, and the coding. Devin was already an agent. It did something on our behalf. It had a memory, had some tools. So going here. So what I'm looking here is what is the impact of agents going to look like on the org structure and working from there. So we kind of remember Conway's law, kind of like the small distributed teams might kind of produce more of a service architecture. And I'm not doing it very much justice, Conway law as a principle, but there is something like the way you're organized as a company and the way you deliver the things that you can deliver of a technology. So, kind of LLMs are trained on humans, right? It's just mimicking our behavior. So there is kind of a mirroring effect when we ask it kind of for these kind of answers. And yes, it will just tell it like, ourselves, like it works on my machine, standard answer, right? So it's very good at kind of like parroting back to us. Somebody said LLMs are actually cultural technologies in a way that Wikipedia is a cultural technology. It spreads and it captures knowledge and kind of brings this back to other humans. It's not like intelligence in that way, but it's kind of like just a tool that a technology that kind of transfers some of that culture. And that made me think about a little bit more out there. One of the instrumental kind of research papers on Genai was that for agents is that they did a kind of this simulation of you know, multiple agents acting independently in a town. Like one was going for coffee and he said, "You're a great developer," and the other one was, "Oh, you're like the librarian And they kind of let this play out and see how kind of one reacted to the other, and they kind of had a memory. So there was an instrumental kind of experiment they did, and kind of they learned a lot of results from this human behavior mirroring LLMs to kind of keep doing this. And obviously, somebody else took this into communicative agents for software developer. They said, you're a developer, you're a tester, you're a security person, and they all like start chatting to each other. And what is noticeable is that you can have one agent, but if you have multiple agents talking to each other and judging each other's output, then you get actually better results. So even with a kind of an older model, when you bring the agents of working together, you actually get better results. So that's kind of like our team collaboration that we say diversity is key. So we bring multiple perspectives, we have a focus that we bring in there. And then people have been building those frameworks that they can just say, create software company, here's all the tasks, run the simulation, come up with an ID, do the marketing of this. And I'm just showing this because nobody's using this in production, but it kind of gives you that idea of like, it's not too far-fetched in that way. But we all learned in the previous part, like we should not fear because it will never go automatically in, kind of that way. We're still like either supervising this whole company, maybe we're not the manager, but now become CEO of kind of the company of agents there. And this is another interesting thing is if you have multiple agents working together, if one agent goes rogue, it impacts all the other agents. So it's like toxic behavior in a company of people working together. And if you say toxic behavior, you want to have a code of conduct. And OpenAI actually released almost like a code of conduct for their agents and APIs to respond. Oh, you have to, make sure you put the, you benefit the human and kind of bring in there. I find it just, the similarities. I'm not, kind of trying to propose that this is the perfect thing, but there are like some similarities on what is happening here and the mirroring effect. And so people start wondering, like, what is the impact with an AI kind of co-pilot? Like, will we have smaller teams, bigger teams? Will we have shorter sprints because everything goes so fast and we're just supervising if we throw enough compute at this? Like, of course, this is all speculation, right? We don't know, but it is interesting to see this kind of data point is the Series A companies actually are getting smaller. And I find that fascinating. Is this because they're more productive? They can do a lot more. Everything is abstracted. They can do, show their case a lot easier with less people. So anyway, that's a data point. You might say that the teams are getting smaller. I also heard, from an opposite person in a factory, when they automated the learning of people working in the factory, um, the manager could actually manage more people, so the teams got bigger. So I don't know, but it's there is bound to be some impact of the AI having on our kind of companies and the way of our team sizes or ideal team sizes there. And this also brings up the notion of a specialist agent, a generic agent. Like what is the most valuable? Like something you run once a year, once a minute, kind of like, is it important? Is it not important? So maybe specialized agents going to be bought. The generic agents we can buy, but we're only going to focus on the handcrafted, very niche to our domain, very thing, high value there. So that's also something to consider, that the role of kind of a specialist. Does that kind of give a better thing? The generalists already shown in teams, when they can collaborate, but now maybe we need more specialists and a generalist to be the manager there. And then you can start like dreaming, like, is it AI topologies, AI team topologies? Where do you put your AI? Just on the button? Would there ever be a CEO? And somebody called this like AI inclusiveness. Are you like allowing AI as a team partner? on your company. Like nobody knows, but there, like I do feel that there's something about an impact on the AI and the structure. It is all too soon to see what that is, but I do feel that there's going to be something happening there in one way or another. And yeah, it is. A lot of people, are we now at the hype, over the hype? Are we still going? I think agents will definitely bring a new boost. And a lot of people think, oh, it was ChatGPT, was great, but we've already seen it. I think agents will kind of bring a big boost. So I think there is the hype we overestimate with the iPhone, kind of like, oh, this is great, and then it goes away. But ultimately, in the long run, that has so much big of an impact that we didn't see the long run impact, right? So that's kind of like a way of thinking about the new technology in there. And obviously, I'm enthusiast, and I might like be totally wrong, and I might be totally biased, but that is kind of like trying to bring a little bit of this future in. So those kind of were the three parts. Again, it's like increased speculation, um, but hey, it's a thought experiment in there. And if you want to do more learnings, I have a YouTube channel where most of my talks are. If you want to look like more in detail on the platform team or that kind of workshop and so on, or you can find me on LinkedIn. And if you need a hand, if I can help you prototype or strategy of your AI or Genai product, let me know. You know where to find me. I should be easy reachable. And with that, I think we're at time, and I'll stop sharing, and we can take the last questions.
Yes, Patrick, thanks a lot. Enlightening. And so here's a question from Sonal, who asks, how mature are our LLMs to understand the context and sentiments behind the queries? What evolution do we expect in this area?
First of all, they're not, right? They don't understand sentiment. This is just prediction doing it. I think it is more about the reasoning and the react pattern that kind of does a feedback loop and thinks like organizes a little bit more with agents and some memory, that we're mimicking more of the human behavior and kind of thing. It is still generic, but we're finding ways to kind of steer this more and have it become more focused. Would I trust this for anything crucial? Probably not. Would it help me? And I be the judge of things that is good and that is bad? It can definitely speed things up. So I can't qualify this as a number, although a lot of people are having leaderboards of agents building stuff and agents replying to GitHub issues. I think the last number I saw was 18% they could solve of solving GitHub issues of a known kind of like set of problems. Is this enough? Likely not. But every day there's like, oh, now we're like at 20 or something. Somebody found like a clever thing. But 20% of things solved saves time, right? So it's kind of definitely a way of looking at it. And I don't think Google would be going from 25% to 50% if there was no productivity gain there as well.
So I have a question regarding the agents. So definitely, we're all already using coding assistants, and I personally talk to practitioners who use stuff like ChatGPT to generate code, at least for the first iteration, to generate the boilerplate that they can edit later. Do you already see organizations actually employing agents in their software delivery processes?
Not in
Actual
that way.
examples?
Not in that way, but there's definitely like GPTs to do some triaging or support. So that is more of a quantifier things, or they do judge on like pull requests. So is that an agent? That that is doing something on your behalf that otherwise you would have done yourself, and it's not in the IDE doing, but you're still verifying it in a way. The Devin thing, I think it's still gimmicky in a way, but I do see a spread of tools coming there. But I have no data points of saying, well, we're using it here directly. Yeah, that's kind
Okay.
of the best I have right now.
And the last question, from your experience, do you think companies looking for AI engineers, quote unquote, are mainly looking for a full stack engineer that develops the full solution, or do you think there is awareness of this role of integration engineers that you described that a DevOps could fulfill?
Yeah. I think that a lot of the time, so it is with the word DevOps. What are you looking for as a DevOps? Are you looking for a Kubernetes specialist and so on, or actually somebody who collaborates, right? So there's like two mindset of looking at this. And it's the same thing with an AI engineer. Some companies will put the title AI engineer, and they actually are looking, if you look at the keywords later, they're looking for a data scientist that understands LLM. And some who kind of more understand this, they'll be looking at the frameworks, LangChain, integrations with APIs. So they kind of are a little bit further along. But most companies, when they look on the AI engineering, they are still biased towards hiring more of a data science person. It is actually for a test that I like. It's almost like when you ask somebody, what are you doing for Genai? If they're talking a lot about like we're fine-tuning the model, we're training the data, you kind of know that they're like still in the data science sphere. If they talk about like, oh, we're building these like applications, and yeah, we're kind of running and generating kind of summaries, then they're kind of more in the application space, and that could bring the full stack. But the full stack alone is probably not enough, in that you do have to bring in some knowledge about an LLM or maybe some of the other infrastructure there as well. So, but yeah.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Thanks for that. And this is just to remind everyone that this was brought to you by Perfect Scale. And one thing I think we haven't discussed is that running all of these models is definitely, like we've mentioned it a little bit, but it's definitely costly. And especially if you're running and training the models on your own infrastructure, that definitely can elevate your cloud costs. And we know there are quite a lot of companies doing the training on Kubernetes clusters, and some of our customers are. And if you want to try and optimize this, give Perfect Scale a try. You can start free, give your cluster a health check. We provide very good cost insights, especially for all those ephemeral jobs that are crunching your data. So definitely sign up and see where your Kubernetes clusters can be more performant, more cost optimized for those LLM and GenAI and data pipelines that you're running. Thanks, Patrick. It was so great having you with us. I've become smarter. Not as smart as an LLM, but definitely smarter.
Yeah, one step at a time. So appreciate being here. And if you want to reach out to me, or like just share what you thought, or like anything on LinkedIn, kind of just tag me and Perfect Scale, and we'll be happy to reply or pick this up with you. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and we'll share the slides, of course. Thank you.